The last tendrils of asphalt had long since vanished, replaced by a gravel track that chewed at my tires, then by a barely there path of packed earth. My vehicle, usually a bastion of polished order, now wore a coat of valley dust, a testament to the journey's length and the land's stubborn refusal to yield. The engine, a familiar hum of precision, had begun to strain, a low, guttural protest against the incline and the sheer remoteness of the place. I navigated by a hand-drawn sketch, a relic from the solicitor's office, its lines elegant but vague, utterly lacking the meticulous grid coordinates I so revered. It was a cartographer's nightmare, yet it was my only guide. Then, through a sudden break in the ancient gnarled trees, the estate appeared. It was less a dwelling and more a sprawling, petrified leviathan, its slate roof a patchwork of moss and missing tiles, its stone walls weeping dark trails where rain had etched its passage over centuries. A chill, not of the air, but of something deeper settled upon me. This was not a place forgotten. It was a place deliberately left behind, abandoned to the slow, relentless reclamation of the earth. My arrival was met by no welcoming creak of a gate, no distant bark, only the sigh of wind through skeletal branches. The driveway, once a grand approach, was now a choked river of weeds and cracked flagstones. I parked, the crunch of gravel under my boots echoing too loudly in the profound quiet. Stepping out, I inhaled deeply, expecting the clean bite of pine, but instead tasted the damp sweetness of decay, of wet earth and something else, something metallic and old, like rusted iron and stagnant water. A shiver traced its way down my spine, a familiar tremor of unease whenever precision faltered, whenever the known world blurred. The front door, a heavy slab of oak, hung slightly ajar as if tired of waiting. My footsteps on the flagstone floor resonated through the cavernous entrance hall, a space designed for grandeur but now merely echoing emptiness. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped from the high ceilings like forgotten tapestries. I began my methodical survey, my mind automatically cataloging, attempting to impose order on the chaos. This was my inheritance, and the terms of the will were clear. A year's residence. I moved from room to room, a sense of disquiet growing with each opening door. Here, a grand dining hall with a table still set for phantom guests, linen yellowed, cutlery tarnished. There, a drawing room where faded velvet armchairs seemed to slump in exhausted resignation. But it was the layout itself that truly began to prickle at the edges of my meticulous mind. I found myself turning down a corridor, expecting to find the cramped linen closet of my own childhood home, only to discover a vast, unlit pantry. Moments later, I rounded a corner that should have led to the small, sunlit breakfast nook where my mother used to read, but instead opened into a dim, windowless antechamber. It was subtle, insidious. The sequence of rooms felt off. It was like walking through my childhood home's slightly wrong rooms in the wrong order. A disorienting echo that twisted the familiar into something subtly alien. A staircase, identical in its balustrade to one I remembered, ascended to a landing that branched in directions utterly foreign, leading to rooms that felt both known and entirely unknown. My internal compass, usually infallible, spun wildly in this architectural labyrinth. I pushed past the creeping unease, drawn by a grand arched doorway at the far end of the ground floor. It was heavier than the others, solid and imposing. The door swung inward with a reluctant sigh, revealing a space that stole my breath. This was the library. It was immense, a cathedral of forgotten knowledge, soaring 2 stories high, lined floor to ceiling with wooden shelves that groaned under the weight of countless volumes. A spiral staircase of wrought iron wound its way to an upper gallery, its delicate filigree obscured by a fine layer of dust. The air here was different, drier, imbued with the rich, leathery aroma of aged paper and dried ink. My eyes, accustomed to the stark precision of modern charts, widened. Here, among the leather-bound tomes and crumbling manuscripts, were maps. Hundreds of them. They lay stacked on reading tables, rolled in dusty tubes, and even tacked haphazardly to the walls, many of them unframed, raw. I approached the nearest table, my fingers tracing the brittle edges of a parchment. It was a coastal chart, hand-drawn with exquisite detail, its waves rendered with a swirling artistry, its coastlines dotted with tiny, perfect lighthouses. A masterpiece of historical cartography. But then I unrolled another. This one depicted a valley, strangely familiar yet utterly alien. Its contours were too sharp, its river systems too intricate, branching in patterns that defied geological logic. Further still, I found a series of maps, larger and more abstract. One showed a vast, undulating plain, its features not geographical but almost organic, like the veins on a leaf or the capillaries of a living thing. Another depicted a mountain range that seemed to shift and writhe across the page, its peaks rendered with an unsettling, almost liquid quality, as if they were in constant, silent motion. My meticulous nature, usually a shield against disorder, found itself both repelled and captivated. These were not merely inaccuracies. They were deliberate departures from reality, or perhaps a different kind of reality altogether. This was not just a collection. It was a trove, a puzzle, an invitation. And something within me, a deep professional curiosity, began to stir, a quiet hum beneath the layer of unease. The valley, a cupped palm of ancient earth, held a silence so profound it seemed to press against my eardrums. My vehicle, finally at rest beside the sprawling, decaying house, exhaled a final click of cooling metal. Inside the estate, dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating forgotten furniture draped in white shrouds. But the true work, I knew, lay outside. I began my cartographic survey with the methodical precision that had always defined me. My equipment, sleek and modern, contrasted starkly with the estate's crumbling grandeur. The laser rangefinder, a precise extension of my will, hummed softly in my gloved hand. My GPS unit, calibrated to within a centimeter, confirmed my starting coordinates. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal perfume. I moved with purpose, measuring distances, elevations, angles. Each step was deliberate, each reading recorded with the crisp scratch of a pen on waterproof paper. The estate's perimeter, a sprawling entanglement of overgrown hedges and crumbling stone walls, yielded slowly to my systematic approach. I cross-referenced my live data with the antique maps I'd found in the library parchment scrolls, many of them with elegant copperplate script and hand-drawn symbols. Initially, the discrepancies were expected. A path marked clearly on an 18th century survey was now a faint indentation swallowed by ivy. A small pond, once a prominent feature, had clearly receded into a marshy hollow. These were the ravages of time, the slow, inexorable march of nature reclaiming its own. The old maps, beautiful as they were often more artistic impression than scientific document, their lines sometimes wavering with a charming, if frustrating, imprecision. I dismissed the minor inconsistencies, attributing them to the limited tools of past cartographers, or simply the landscape's natural evolution over centuries. My modern instruments, I affirmed, would provide the definitive truth. By the afternoon, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. The rhythmic click of my rangefinder, the rustle of my map sheets, the steady progress across the land, these were the comforts of my craft. I was charting the eastern boundary, a dense thicket of blackthorn and ancient oak, when I paused. Before me, partially obscured by a curtain of grasping vines, stood a cluster of 3 stones, lichen-encrusted and roughly conical. I remembered them from yesterday, a distinctive landmark where I had stopped to adjust my pack. My brow furrowed. I had walked this very stretch yesterday afternoon, tracing the rough path from the old stables to the crumbling mausoleum. I remembered these stones with specific clarity, their peculiar grouping, the way the late sun had caught the moss on their northern faces. They had been closer to the gnarled trunk of the largest oak, perhaps 3 paces inward from the faint deer trail I had followed. Now they were not. They stood, unmistakably, 4 paces outward, almost touching the edge of the deeper thicket, where the brush was impenetrable. I blinked, then looked again, slowly, methodically. The surrounding foliage, the angle of the sun through the canopy, the slope of the land, it all felt right. Yet the stones, those silent, unmoving sentinels, had shifted. My rational mind, a fortress of logic and empirical data, immediately sought an explanation. Had I misremembered? The light yesterday afternoon had been different, perhaps playing tricks on my perception. Or perhaps I had simply passed a similar cluster of stones, and this was another. But no. The distinctive triple formation, the exact shade of moss, the faint chisel marks on the largest one, I was certain. This was the same landmark. I took out my rangefinder again, my hands feeling suddenly clumsy. I measured the distance from the nearest oak, then from a prominent boulder I'd logged just minutes before. The numbers clicked into place, precise and unwavering. According to my current measurements, the stones were indeed where I now saw them. But my memory, sharp and unyielding, insisted they had been elsewhere. I walked the path again, slowly, retracing my steps from yesterday as best I could recall. Each familiar route, each patch of bare earth, seemed to affirm my memory of the stone's previous position. Yet, when I approached the spot where my memory insisted they should be, there was only empty ground, a scattering of dead leaves. My breath hitched. My heart, usually a steady metronome of precision, now beat with a frantic, irregular rhythm. This wasn't a historical inaccuracy. This wasn't decay. The land itself, it seemed, was not merely ancient or overgrown. It was, impossibly, mutable. And in that moment, the silent valley no longer felt merely quiet. It felt watchful, as if holding its breath, waiting for my next move. Inside the estate, dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy panes. But the true heart of its mystery lay deeper, within the vast, shadowed library. The air here was a thick draft of forgotten ages, scented with parchment and dried ink, a heady perfume that promised secrets. My cartographer's soul, usually a meticulous instrument of logic and precision, felt a strange, almost magnetic pull toward the stacked, leather-bound folios and the rolled scrolls that lined the towering shelves. I found my initial task in the library to be less a chore and more a pilgrimage. My fingers, accustomed to the crispness of modern paper and the slick glide of digital interfaces, now traced the textured surfaces of ancient vellum and heavy rag paper. The sheer volume was staggering. Maps of the estate itself, of the valley, of surrounding regions, some dating back centuries, their edges frayed like ancient skin, their colors muted by time's relentless breath. It began subtly, an almost imperceptible discord in the symphony of lines and names. A river, etched with delicate blue, seemed to flow with an improbable curl, its course defying the natural inclination of gravity across a depicted elevation. I dismissed it, at first, as artistic license, a cartographer's momentary lapse, or a deliberate simplification for clarity. But then another, and another. A mountain range, stark and jagged in one rendition, softened into rolling hills in an older yet contemporaneous piece. A lake, a shimmering sapphire on one sheet, shrank to a verdant marsh on another, both supposedly accurate depictions of the same period. My initial intellectual curiosity, a comfortable academic pursuit, began to fray at the edges, giving way to a prickle of unease. These weren't mere discrepancies. They were impossibilities. Topographies that shifted like dreams. Features that defied the very bedrock of geology. I spread a dozen maps across the great mahogany table, their overlapping territories creating a patchwork of contradictions. Here, a forest of gnarled oaks, robust and ancient. There, in its exact geographic twin, a barren stretch of scree and rock. The land itself, according to these documents, was a mercurial thing, mutable and restless. And then, the symbols. Not the familiar compass roses or decorative flourishes, but small, intricate glyphs, recurring with an unsettling persistence. They appeared at the confluence of impossible rivers, at the heart of vanishing lakes, etched into the flanks of phantom mountains. They were not alphabetic, nor pictographic in any conventional sense. Some resembled twisted knots, others skeletal trees, or perhaps the distorted outline of an eye. They were always subtle, almost hidden within the dense cross-hatching of terrain or the delicate script of a forgotten place name, yet once seen, they could not be unseen. They pulsed with a silent, cryptic energy, drawing my eye, demanding recognition I could not give. My cartographer's training, a lifelong devotion to accuracy and verifiable truth, propelled me into a fervent, almost desperate attempt at corroboration. I sought out historical records, old land deeds, diaries that might mention the valley's past. I scoured the estate's smaller collections of local histories. Even a few antiquated geological surveys I found tucked away in a dusty cabinet. I spent days, then nights, hunched over the maps, my eyes burning in the dim lamplight, comparing, cross-referencing, searching for any external echo of the anomalies I was finding. The vastness of the library, once a comforting haven of knowledge, now felt like a mausoleum of forgotten truths, or perhaps deliberately hidden ones. Every external source I consulted yielded nothing. No mention of shifting peaks, no record of disappearing rivers. The world outside the estate, as far as I could ascertain, maintained a steadfast, immutable geography. The enigma deepened, coiling itself around my thoughts, tightening its grip with each failed cross-reference. What was I holding in my hands? Not mere historical curiosities, but something else entirely. The lines and symbols seemed to hum with an unspoken language, a silent conversation with the very land they depicted. My initial determination, a methodical drive to understand, began to curdle into something more consuming, an obsession. Sleep became a forgotten luxury, food an afterthought. The world beyond the library's windows faded into an indistinct blur. I started to notice things within the house itself, subtle shifts that mirrored the map's unsettling nature. The layout of the great hall, once clear in my mind, would occasionally present itself with a subtly altered configuration, a fireplace appearing where a bookshelf had been, a staircase shifted a few feet to the left. The house, like the maps, seemed to breathe, to rearrange its internal organs in the dead of night. The maps were no longer just paper and ink. They were alive, pulsating with an unseen force, reflecting and perhaps influencing the very fabric of the estate. The dust, a fine, ancient powder, layered every surface of the library, catching the grudging light that bled through the grimy windows. It swirled in the air, a silent, glittering tide, stirred by the mere presence of my breath. The silence, too, was a palpable thing, thick and insulating, absorbing the creak of the floorboards beneath my boots, the rustle of my jacket. I moved through the cavernous space, a lone figure dwarfed by towering shelves laden with forgotten histories. The air tasted of mildew, old paper, and something else, a faint metallic tang, like distant thunder or a freshly turned grave. My cartographer's instincts, honed by years of precise observation, drew me to the oldest, most imposing desk in the room. Its dark wood, scarred by time and neglect, held an undeniable gravity. I ran a hand over its cool, slick surface, feeling the grain beneath the dust. This was where the previous occupant, a distant relation I'd never known, had likely worked. Perhaps even the cartographer whose impossible maps now resided within this very house. My fingers traced the intricate carvings, the faded patina, searching for some clue, some anchor in the disorienting quiet. It was not a hidden catch, nor a spring-loaded panel, but a subtle imperfection that caught my eye. A section of the desk's side, flush against a built-in bookshelf, seemed to possess a slightly different sheen, a minute variation in the wood's texture. I pressed, I prodded, then with a slow, deliberate pull, a narrow seam appeared. The twine disintegrated under my touch, releasing the fragments. They were not formal journals, but rather a collection of loose pages, some folded letters, others torn from a larger ledger, all filled with a cramped, agitated script in faded sepia ink. The first few pages I deciphered spoke of seasonal observations, the valley's changing moods, the occasional visit from a solicitor, the mundane chronicles of a solitary life. But then, the tone began to shift, a subtle discord entering the careful prose. The entries grew shorter, more fevered, the handwriting less steady. "The land breathes," one passage declared, its ink spiderwebbing into the paper's fibers. "It has a hunger, delusions of solitude," I thought, a mind unraveling in the quiet. Yet I continued to read, a strange compulsion guiding my gaze. "To force its lines," the scrawl continued, "is to feed the aberration. It reshapes itself in defiance, or worse, in agreement. And each time a piece of us is taken." Correction. I dismissed it instantly. Superstitious nonsense, the ravings of a man driven mad by isolation. Yet the implication, the sheer audacity of it, settled like a cold stone in my gut. They spoke of mapping the unseen, not just the physical landscape, but the currents of something beneath, something that pulsed with an intelligence both ancient and malevolent. "The true map," an entry asserted, "is not drawn, but felt. It is a living organ, its veins the hidden waterways, its arteries the forgotten paths." I told myself this, firmly, rationally. But as I read, a faint shiver traced its way down my spine. I looked up from the fragmented pages, my gaze sweeping the library, taking in the familiar architecture, the towering shelves, the arched doorways. And for a fleeting, disorienting instant, the grand staircase which I had ascended mere hours ago seemed subtly altered. Its banister appeared to curve in a way I didn't quite remember, the landing at its summit slightly wider, or perhaps narrower. It was the briefest flicker, a phantom shift, but it was enough. I blinked, shook my head, dispelling the momentary illusion. The staircase settled back into its expected geometry, solid and unyielding. It was the flickering light, the strain of reading the faded script, the creeping exhaustion. Of course it was. The land breathes. Dangers of correction, mapping the unseen. They resonated, a low, unsettling hum beneath my carefully constructed skepticism. The unsettling words from the ancient map had lodged themselves beneath my skin, a cold splinter of dread. The house, which had merely hummed with a quiet, dusty presence before, now seemed to breathe, its timbers sighing a low, mournful tune in the pre-dawn stillness. I had dismissed the scrawled warnings as the ravings of a mind fractured by isolation, a common affliction in forgotten valleys such as this. The first hint of true disquiet came not from within the estate's walls, but from the land itself. I had risen with the first pale light, driven by an almost frantic need to re-verify the perimeter. My initial survey, though painstaking, had felt incomplete, a sketch rather than a definitive chart. I carried my instruments, my grid paper, my meticulous eye. Today, it carried a subtle metallic tang, like distant rust. I walked the southern boundary, following the winding path that skirted the old orchard. My boots crunched on fallen twigs, a sound that felt unnaturally loud. Then I stopped. It was no more than a trickle, a silver thread weaving through the undergrowth, but it was undeniably there, A stream. A stream where there had been none before. My brow furrowed. I consulted my initial, freshly drawn map. Blank. Empty. I remembered the dry, moss-covered hollow, the slight dip in the terrain where this water now flowed. Had I simply missed it? Impossible. My methods were precise, my observations unblemished. It felt real, tasted of mineral and earth. Yet the anomaly unsettled me deeply. I pulled out my charcoal pencil, adding a tentative dotted blue line to my map, a new vein on the valley's skin. The next morning, the stream had widened, its gentle gurgle now a more insistent murmur. What had been a trickling thread was now a definite ribbon of water, carving a shallow bed through the soil. More alarmingly, the stand of gnarled oaks, my landmark, seemed subtly, almost imperceptibly, displaced. They were still there, still gnarled, but their collective mass felt shifted, as if a great, unseen hand had nudged them a few paces to the east. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't a trick of the light. The landscape was mutable, fluid, defying the immutable laws of cartography. I spent the entire day remapping the area, extending my grid lines, taking precise bearings. Each tree, each stone, each newly formed bank of the stream was plotted with a desperate exactitude. I wanted to pin the valley down, to anchor it to a fixed reality with the meticulous lines of my pencil. But my efforts seemed only to accelerate the changes. The more I tried to fix the landscape on paper, the more it seemed to writhe beneath my gaze. The grove of trees, which I had so carefully replotted, had by nightfall not merely shifted, but had thickened, its ancient trunks seeming to swell, its branches weaving into a denser, more impenetrable canopy. The stream, now a small brook, flowed with a stronger current, carving deeper into the earth, its banks eroding with alarming speed. The true horror, however, manifested within the estate itself. I returned to the house, my mind a tangled skein of disbelief and burgeoning fear, hoping for the solid, predictable comfort of its familiar architecture. But even that was denied me. I ascended the grand staircase, my hand trailing along the polished banister. At the landing, I turned towards my study, the room I had claimed as my own, its heavy oak door a comforting sentinel. But the door was not there. Instead, a wall, adorned with a faded tapestry depicting a hunting scene I did not recall, stood in its place. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced my mind was playing cruel tricks. I turned back toward the staircase, then to where the door should be. Still a wall. I stumbled backwards, my hand reaching for a wall that suddenly felt unfamiliar beneath my fingers. I had walked its halls for weeks, mapping its internal structure in my mind. This was my inheritance, my domain. Yet it was becoming a stranger. The very architecture seemed to breathe, to reconfigure itself with a silent, malevolent will. My hands trembled as I picked up a pencil. Each line I drew, each correction I made to account for the valley's impossible topography, felt less like an act of control and more like an offering. The maps were not just documents. They were conduits, living membranes. And my intent, my precise, desperate intent to chart and fix, was being hijacked, twisted into an engine for something ancient and hungry, something that desired to reshape reality, using my own meticulous hand as its unwitting instrument. I was not merely mapping a changing landscape, I was enabling its monstrous transformation. Sleep had become a fractured thing, a tapestry of unsettling images and the phantom weight of old parchment. Daylight, when it finally arrived, offered no solace. My cartographer's tools lay scattered on the vast mahogany table, silent witnesses to my growing unease. I returned to the maps, drawn by an invisible current. The words from the previous night still prickled at my memory, urging me to look deeper, beyond the obvious topographical errors and anachronisms. Hours dissolved into the quiet hum of the room, marked only by the rustle of brittle paper and the occasional intake of my breath. I traced contour lines that twisted into impossible spirals, followed rivers that vanished into thin air, and observed mountain ranges that appeared and disappeared across different centuries' depictions of the same valley. Then, a pattern emerged. Not in the land features themselves, but in the annotations surrounding them. They weren't decorative. They were deliberate. Like a forgotten language, each symbol seemed to indicate a shift, a warping, a sudden appearance or disappearance of a landmark. My initial thought, that these were merely the cartographer's attempts to record the mutable landscape, began to curdle into something far more sinister. They weren't records. They were commands. The maps were not representations. They were instruments. Each line, each symbol, a silent incantation, a trigger for transformation. A specific map caught my attention, one of the earliest depictions of the estate's immediate surroundings. It showed a small, unnamed hillock to the west, just beyond the ancient oak grove. My own recent survey, painstakingly conducted over the past weeks, revealed nothing but a gentle slope there, a gradual rise of earth. The map's depiction felt jarringly precise, yet utterly wrong according to my modern measurements. It was an anomaly, a persistent error that had grated on my cartographer's soul since I first noticed it. The old map presented a slight, almost imperceptible bulge in the land that simply wasn't there now. A small correction, a minor adjustment. My hand reached for my pen, an instinctual response to perceived inaccuracy. With a breath held, I carefully placed the nib to the parchment, intending to smooth the aberrant contour line, to erase the phantom hillock and redraw the land as it truly lay. For a terrifying, elongated second, the familiar oak bookshelves warped, their precise rows of spines twisting into an impossible labyrinth. It was a grotesque mockery of memory, a familiar comfort rendered horrifyingly alien. My breath hitched, a frozen gasp in my throat. Then, the floorboards beneath me groaned, a sound not of old timber settling, but of immense, unyielding pressure. A deep, resonant rumble, like the earth itself clearing its throat, vibrated through the very marrow of my bones. It started as a low thrum, a subterranean pulse, then escalated into a tearing, groaning shriek that clawed at the air. The old house shuddered, its ancient bones rattling, and a fine dust, like powdered bone, sifted down from the ceiling. My head snapped towards the library window, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Through the pain, the landscape was no longer serene. In the direction of the old oak grove, precisely where I had made my infinitesimal correction, the earth was convulsing. A monstrous fissure, jagged and raw, ripped open the ground. It yawned wide, a fresh, hungry mouth in the familiar landscape, spewing forth a cloud of fine ochre dust that billowed into the pale sky. It was too vast, too sudden, too impossible. These maps were alive. They were instruments. The entity was real, and I was its unwitting hand. My mind raced, frantically trying to connect the delicate stroke of my pen to the monstrous rift outside. Could I reverse it? Could a line drawn back, an erasure, mend the tearing earth? The thought was a desperate, terrifying gamble. What if I made it worse? What if my attempt to undo only unleashed something far more horrifying? I stood paralyzed, caught between the impossible chasm outside and the silent, treacherous map beneath my trembling fingers, a terrifying new understanding blooming in the pit of my stomach. Sleep, when it finally claimed me, was not a balm, but another terrain to be navigated, and it was a territory more treacherous than any I had yet charted. The kitchen, with its chipped ceramic sink, now opened directly into my grandmother's bedroom, her antique dresser standing where the pantry should have been. It was a map drawn in the fluid logic of nightmare, and I was perpetually lost within its shifting boundaries, the sense of being observed a palpable weight on my shoulders. The memory of the dream clung to me, a viscous film. That day, the house became a sounding board for unspoken anxieties. I heard them first as a low thrum, a vibration in the very bones of the structure. But soon they coalesced. They seemed to emanate from the library, a constant, indistinct murmur like dry leaves skittering across stone or the slow grinding of tectonic plates. I would be in the kitchen, preparing a meager meal, and a sudden sharp rustle would draw my head up, my gaze fixed on the closed library door. I would pause, straining to decipher the sound, convinced I heard my name, or a word that resonated with a forgotten fear. But the moment I focused, the sound would recede, leaving only the mundane creak of old timbers and the distant sigh of the wind. They were not the long, dancing figures cast by the sun through the ancient windows, nor the deep pools of night. These were anomalies. I recoiled, overturning my inkwell, but by the time I steadied myself, the anomaly was gone, leaving only the spreading stain of black ink. Had the isolation finally taken its toll? I wanted to believe it, to dismiss them as tricks of light and an overactive imagination. Then it deepened. My own thoughts, once private and distinct, began to feel not quite my own. A sudden, intrusive image unrelated to my current task, a phrase that felt alien on the tongue of my mind, a fleeting urge to redraw a certain border on a map in a way that defied all logic. This presence was ancient, vast, and utterly devoid of human warmth or comprehension. It was like a glacier moving through the landscape of my psyche, slow but inexorable, carving new valleys and peaks where none had been before. I was no longer merely observing the house's malevolence. I was being observed, catalogued, and perhaps slowly, meticulously redesigned from within. The entity, it seemed, had found its way not just into the maps, but into the very architecture of my mind. My cartographer's mind, usually a fortress of logic and empirical observation, felt porous, permeable to the burgeoning unease. I rose from the library desk, the map still spread open, its ink seeming to pulse with a faint internal light. I fumbled for the matches, my fingers brushing against nothing but air where the box should have been. A low groan, deep within the house's foundations, reverberated through the floorboards. A sound both ancient and alive. It wasn't the settling of old wood. It was a shift, a deliberate realignment. This was a voice. The air, once merely still, now felt viscous, as if I were moving through water. A faint, earthy scent, like disturbed soil and damp stone, began to permeate the air, overriding the familiar must of old paper. Determined to shake off the growing unease, to prove the house a mere collection of wood and plaster, I decided to walk its familiar corridors, to re-establish my mental map. I stepped out of the library, intending to turn right towards the grand staircase, but my hand, reaching for the balustrade, met only a smooth, plastered wall. I froze. The staircase, a monumental presence in the main hall, was gone. In its place was a narrow, unlit passage, its entrance shrouded in a deeper gloom than the rest of the hall. This was impossible. I retraced my steps, my boot heels echoing unnaturally loud on the polished wood. The library door, which I had just exited, now opened onto a small, dusty antechamber I had never seen before, filled with decaying portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every movement. The antechamber had no other exits. I was trapped, not by physical barriers, but by the house's own malicious geometry. I pushed through the antechamber, forcing myself to confront the impossible. No, this was smaller, quaint, with faded floral wallpaper and a cast-iron stove that looked utterly out of place. A child's drawing, crudely taped to a cupboard door, depicted a crooked house under a weeping sun. The small pantry I knew from my early years, then the living room, but the fireplace was on the wrong wall, and the window looked out onto a dense, unfamiliar forest, not the overgrown rose garden. It was a cruel mockery, a twisted echo of a place meant to be safe. A door I swore led to the servants' quarters now opened into a cavernous ballroom, its chandeliers shrouded in cobwebs, its vast space stretching into an unsettling infinity. When I tried to return to the doorway I had entered, it was no longer there. My cartographer's training, my reliance on fixed points and measurable distances, was useless. The house was a living diagram, constantly redrawing itself, its lines shifting, its boundaries dissolving. It was not merely dilapidated, it was sentient, malevolent. It was an extension of the entity, a physical manifestation of its desire to reshape reality. And I, Marcus, was caught within its horrifying blueprint. The light from my lamp, once a comfort, now seemed to merely illuminate the endless shifting labyrinth. Walls would suddenly jut out, narrowing a passage, forcing me to squeeze through. Floors would subtly incline, throwing me off balance. Familiar objects would appear in new, unsettling contexts. My compass, which I had left on my library desk, now sat on a mantelpiece in a room I had never seen, its needle spinning wildly, uselessly. A specific volume of forgotten poetry from the library, one I had only glanced at hours before, lay open on a rickety bedside table in a room that smelled faintly of brine and decay. I had been so focused on navigating the internal shifts, on charting the impossible, that I hadn't considered the larger implication. I pushed open a window, desperate for a glimpse of the valley, of the familiar, mutable landscape. I tried another window, then another, each one offering the same impenetrable view. The front doors, monumental and heavy, were my last hope. I found them eventually, after navigating a series of twisting corridors that led me through what felt like the entire length of the house, only to deposit me back near the ballroom. I threw my weight against the heavy oak, the wood groaning in protest. The house had swallowed itself, digested its own exterior. The estate, once sprawling and imposing, had folded in upon itself, becoming an inescapable self-contained pocket of warped reality. There was no outside. There was only this. I was trapped, a cartographer lost in a map that was constantly being redrawn by a malevolent hand, and I was its sole, terrified inhabitant. A profound shift had occurred, not in the physical architecture around me, but in the very air I breathed, in the way light fell across familiar objects. A tremor, not of the earth but of something deeper, resonated through the floorboards. It was a subtle, insistent thrumming, a pulse that drew me, not with force, but with an irresistible, terrifying curiosity. There, hidden beneath a particularly heavy volume on obscure heraldry, was a faint seam in the wood paneling, almost imperceptible. A push, a soft click, and a section of the wall receded with a sigh of ancient air. With my lamp held high, its beam a fragile spear against the encroaching gloom, I descended. The steps were uneven, cut from rough-hewn stone, slick with perpetual moisture. Each downward tread echoed, amplified into the unknown. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. I felt a growing pressure behind my eyes, a sense of being watched, not by eyes, but by something vast and elemental. The descent seemed endless, spiraling deeper beneath the estate, far beyond any cellar or foundation I had ever imagined. This was not a natural cave, nor a mere basement. It was a place of deliberate construction, ancient beyond any recorded history. Its walls carved with geometric patterns that seemed to writhe and shift in the periphery of my vision. And at its heart, bathed in a faint phosphorescent glow that seemed to emanate from within itself, lay the anchor. It was not a map in the conventional sense, nor entirely an altar, but a synthesis of both. A colossal, flat disk of an unknown, obsidian-like substance, it lay flush with the floor, filling the central space. Its surface was not smooth, but rippled and contoured, etched with an intricate, ever-shifting topography. It was a living landscape, a world in perpetual silent flux, and it hummed with the same low thrumming that had drawn me here. This was the entity's heart, its root. This was no mere depiction. It was the world, or rather, the potential for it. The entity, vast and unseen, anchored itself to this object, this living cartography. And it fed. It fed on the intent of a cartographer. My meticulous work, my corrections, my careful additions to the antique maps in the library above, they weren't just charting reality. They were creating it, or rather, reshaping it to the entity's horrifying design. My skill, my precision, my very will to define the world had been its nourishment. A sudden, dizzying wave of disorientation swept through me. It was a brief, terrifying glimpse into the entity's power, a demonstration of how easily it could twist the most fundamental structures of my memory, and by extension, reality itself. My own carefully constructed world, already so fragile, felt like it was crumbling. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The previous owners. They hadn't just been collectors of strange maps. They were either unwitting victims, ensnared like me, their intellect and craft unknowingly fueling this monstrous hunger, or worse, willing mad participants, driven to reshape the world in accordance with the entity's silent, terrible directives. Faint, almost invisible etchings on the stone floor around the great disk revealed crude, frantic attempts at cartography, amateurish scrawls that mirrored the impossible landscapes on the maps upstairs, but with a desperate, unhinged quality. These were not the works of a skilled hand, but of minds broken by the burden of creation. Their failures, their madness, had still fed it, however meagerly. My own work, precise and methodical, had been a feast. My hands, which had always sought to bring order to chaos, had instead been used to usher in a greater, more insidious disorder. The entity desired to redraw and expand its influence over reality, and I, Marcus, the reclusive cartographer, had been its most potent instrument. The thrumming of the living map intensified, a deep, resonant pulse that now felt less like a draw and more like a possessive embrace. I was trapped, bound to this terrible heart, my purpose twisted into a horrifying parody of itself. The question was no longer what was happening, but what I had done, and what I was yet to do. Each stroke of my pen, each carefully rendered contour, had not merely charted the land, it had forged a connection, a conduit. It was an intellect, ancient and predatory, reaching, probing, attempting to unfurl itself within me. My breath hitched. This was no ghost, no spectral resident of these old stones. This was something far grander, far more terrifying. The room wavered. The familiar spines of the books blurred into indistinct smudges of color. The polished oak of the desk rippled like disturbed water. The ornate fireplace in the library, a fixture I knew intimately, receded, replaced by the faded floral wallpaper of my childhood bedroom. But it was wrong. Horribly, subtly wrong. The window, which should have overlooked a sprawling garden, instead gazed out onto a barren, wind-swept plain. The door, usually leading to the main hall, now opened into what felt like a constricted, unfamiliar passage. Not the one I remembered. This was the entity's touch, its insidious power manifesting, not just in the landscape outside, but within the very fabric of my personal reality. It wanted me. Not just my body, not just my mind, but my unique gift, my meticulous hand, my cartographer's soul. It sought to merge, to become one with me, to wield my skills as its own. The ultimate map, the one I had been unknowingly compiling, perfecting, was its instrument. Through me, through my art, it would redraw the entire world. Not just the physical contours, but the very essence of existence, according to its horrific design. A gasp tore from my throat, though no sound escaped the suffocating pressure. I understood now. My corrections, my additions, my pursuit of accuracy on these eldritch parchments had not merely awakened it. They had fed it, strengthened it, prepared the ground for its full emergence. I was the key, the final brushstroke, the unwitting architect of a new, terrible dawn, The entity's presence swelled, encompassing me, pressing down on my consciousness. It was a vast, malevolent consciousness, a primal hunger for dominion, and it saw in me the perfect conduit. My determination, once a quiet strength, now became a desperate, burning defiance. I would not be its tool. The choice lay starkly before me, etched into the very air I struggled to breathe. I could complete the map, surrender to the merging, and become the hand that reshapes reality into an endless nightmare. Or I could find a way to destroy its anchor, the focal point of its power, the source of its insidious influence. But the second path was shrouded in a terrifying vagueness, a promise of terrible personal cost. My fingers, trembling, brushed against the edge of the map, a landscape of impossible peaks and valleys that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. This was it. This was the nexus, the anchor, to destroy it. I closed my eyes, picturing the intricate lines, the precise details I had so painstakingly rendered. It was beautiful, in its own horrifying way, a masterpiece of forbidden knowledge, and it had to be undone. I felt my own thoughts begin to fray at the edges, my sense of self dissolving like ink in water. But a stubborn core remained, a defiant spark. A terrible certainty settled over me. The cost would be absolute, but the alternative was annihilation for all. I had dismissed the scrawled warnings for too long, choosing precision over preservation, unknowingly feeding the maw that now yawned. But no more. A cold resolve, sharp as a newly honed lead, settled within me. The master map, unfurled across the vast oak table in the library, pulsed with a faint, malevolent luminescence that seemed to drink the meager lamplight. Its lines, once mere ink on parchment, writhed with an unseen life, each contour a tendril seeking purchase, each landmark a nascent anchor for the entity's horrifying design. A desperate, almost primitive attempt to draw a boundary that could not be breached. I leaned over the map, the air growing heavy, tasting of ozone and wet earth. The entity, a presence without form, pressed in, a silent scream against my defiance. My gaze fixed on the central nexus, the point where the estate's boundaries bled into the impossible topographies. With a deep, shuddering breath, I began to draw. Not to correct, not to expand, but to contain. I traced a jagged, intricate line around the estate, a barrier not of physical space, but of conceptual negation. The quill scraped against the thick parchment, a sound like chitin against stone, and with each deliberate mark, a tremor ran through the room, through the very foundations of the house. The air around me thickened, growing viscous, like breathing through wet silk. The entity roared, not with sound, but with an internal pressure that threatened to collapse my skull. My vision swam. The kitchen, with its comforting smell of baked bread, now opened directly into my father's study. Its mahogany desk warped into a twisted, gnarled tree root. I saw my younger self, a phantom boy, wander through these impossible corridors, his face etched with a silent, profound confusion. It was a glimpse into the entity's intended reality, a world of dislocated memories and fractured spaces, where comfort became a cruel mockery. Panic clawed at my throat, but my hand, strangely autonomous, kept moving. The obsidian blood ink seemed to burn as it left the quill, searing the parchment. I was drawing a wound, a scar, across the entity's nascent form, severing its newest connections, disrupting its grand design. The vision of the twisted home intensified, threatening to swallow me whole, my own memories weaponized against me. A final, desperate stroke. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. A silent explosion of raw force erupted from the map, throwing me back from the table. I landed hard, my head striking the polished floorboards. For a long, terrifying moment, the world dissolved into pure, formless static, a cacophony of non-existence. Then, just as suddenly, it coalesced. The library was still there. The master map, however, was no longer luminous. Its lines, once vibrant, now seemed faded, almost bleached, as if the very essence of its power had been drained. The air, though still heavy, no longer pulsed with the entity's immediate pressing presence. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy, my head throbbing with a dull ache. My hand went to my temple, fingers coming away slick with blood. But it was not the physical injury that held my attention. Something had shifted within me. The world, through my eyes, was subtly, irrevocably changed. The corners of the room seemed to waver, the patterns on the wallpaper almost breathing. I saw the faint, ghostly outlines of other realities, other possibilities, shimmering beneath the surface of the mundane. The solid oak door, I now perceived, was merely one configuration of atoms among countless others, each equally valid, equally terrifying in its potential. The entity had been thwarted, its immediate influence severed, its grand design for this valley halted. The estate, from the outside, might appear to have returned to a semblance of its former, if dilapidated, glory. The shifting landmarks would likely cease their dance, the impossible topographies recede from the physical realm. But the silence was not peace. It was the quiet of a predator momentarily stunned, not destroyed. And I was no longer the man who had walked into this library. The knowledge of what lay beyond the map, the true fragility of reality, was burned into my very being. I had drawn a boundary for the world, but in doing so, I had erased one within myself.